You're listening to Level Up with Melissa Zalouf from Iron Source.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Level Up, the podcast for people who love making, growing, and of course, playing mobile games. This episode is the second installment in our Growth Loop mini-series, exploring a new paradigm in game growth. In the previous episode, we introduced the idea of the growth loop and looked at it as a whole. And in this episode, we'll be diving into stage one of the loop and looking at it in more detail. Here to guide us on this journey is Yevgeny Perez, appropriately titled VP Growth at Iron Source. Yevgeny, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks, Melissa. Happy to be back here again.
So before diving into the first stage of the growth loop, let's summarize for our listeners, especially if people haven't heard the last episode, what we discussed that last episode, an overview of what this growth loop is and what it's comprised of.
Sure. Essentially, this is one way to look at your game growth in a loop perspective, where the idea is there are 4 steps in this loop that starts with 1, goes through 4, and then back to 1 again. Hopefully, the right outcome is accelerating that loop, where acceleration means more users, more profit. The loop is focused on optimizing 2 main metrics. One would be your app's LTV, your average revenue per user through its lifetime, and maximizing your profits as a business monetizing that game. The first step talks about user acquisition. The second step talks about monetizing within your app. The third step talks about deriving the right insights from how users behave within your app, within the product, and how can you optimize that product experience. And the fourth step, that is closing the loop, deals with really connecting all the dots, getting all the right insights from within the product, and how that relates to your marketing efforts, and which actions should you take the next morning to accelerate that loop to keep fueling that growth.
Mm-hmm. Would you say you've seen more companies in the industry adopt this outlook, or is it gaining traction?
Yes, definitely. I think started gaining more and more traction around a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. A big part of it lies within the structure of the company, so the size of the company. Companies that were established in the last 2 years, gaming companies, most of them are have the structure where that you have the same entity that is overseeing both monetization, product, and performance marketing, which it kind of under the growth umbrella, all of it together. Bigger companies, let's say more established companies, are still some of them are still divided into 2 teams, maybe even 3 teams. One will be the performance marketing team. The second would be the ad monetization team. The third one, which would be the product team, covering all the other monetization aspects. Definitely there's a big shift towards that. I think a good benchmark would be the hyper casual game studios, where it's just basically it is the business model. That's how it works. You bring more and more users every day, and you monetize them as best as possible, and keep doing it over and over again, and then you just move on to the next game, the next product. That's basically the framework.
And okay, so in a way, the growth is essentially the growth. The growth loop is essentially an operational framework, right? It's a way of managing your kind of business growth operations.
Yeah, so it's an operational framework for sure, but a big part of the framework is generating the right insights. Whether the stakeholders would be operational people within the organization, or this can be product people involved. But this can also derive a lot of insights on the senior management level as well, where people can understand better how much of a runway we have with this product. Do we want to keep investing in it, or should we move on to a different game? Or which action should we take? Should we improve this element before we push the throttle? Should we focus on this one? Should we focus on the product? Should we focus on some other metrics? And I think that kind of the insights element provides a broader perspective to all the relevant stakeholders that are not necessarily operational.
Kind of operations and decision making.
Exactly. Yep.
So let's dive in. Today, we're talking about stage one of the growth loop, which involves UA, which some listeners may find a little odd to sort of start a growth loop with UA. Why is the goal of why do we start with UA as opposed to, for example, starting internally with the game, optimizing the game, making sure the metrics inside the game work?
Yep. So this is an interesting one because there's two I'd say there's two different approaches to kind of launching a game. So one aspect would be one approach would be to focus on the game itself, and another approach would be okay, the game is obviously we're going to do that, but we need to also see how the market reacts to that, how the users out there react to that game, because the product focus itself is only looking at users that are have already decided to play the game. What about all the users out there that have never heard about this game? And how do we engage with them? And the first step talks about getting users to play your game. That's basically the meaning of step one. It's in today's world, it's mostly through user acquisitions. There is a very short list of games out there when you look at it broader perspective that enjoy two let's say elements that can drive a lot of users into the game without investing much in paid user acquisition. That would be games with very strong IP, right? So if it's Star Wars, the new Star Wars movie season, and there's a Star Wars game out there, so there's going to be a lot of people just searching for Star Wars and walking through your game, and you're going to have that traction. You'll be able to scale this up and enjoy that. And the second element would be getting featured. And historically, a lot of studios were investing a lot of their time into getting featured, which basically was driving a lot of free users into a game. And this is then that period while you were featured, you were enjoying a lot of that, and you were monetizing those, and that was a big bonus, kind of facilitated by the stores. In today's world, most developers are operating under the assumption that getting featured is a very short-term thing. It's nice. Yes, if your LTV is $10, getting 200,000 users thanks to being featured, that's amazing. That's insane, but that's not realistic for most. And yeah, exactly. So you wanna invest in basically fueling that product that you've built with the new users. You want to invest in getting users in, whether they're organic or whether they're paid, whatever that is. That is what step one is about: getting users to play your game, and that's where basically the loop starts once the game is basically close to being ready. And without the first time you kind of approach step one, you approach it with what you have, with your assumptions. You don't have much history, you don't have much data yet, but then it's something that will scale later through the later stages, once we kind of talk more about them.
Hmm. So a lot of, or put differently, then step one is a lot about kind of assessing the market demand for your game, right? Beyond organic, like unless you have IP to leverage or you're lucky enough to get featured, it's kind of like, okay, do and how many users want to play this game, or
Yeah,
what's the response
exactly.
from the market?
It's exactly that, like you said. Uh,
Do you find that kind of most game companies test marketability at this stage, and use it as a litmus test for, yes, no, go no go on a game's launch or viability?
yes, definitely, more and more. I would say it's definitely not where it should be. There are a lot of games that do not see the light of day for the wrong reasons, and there are games that are getting a lot of heavy UA investment into, even though they don't deserve it. When you think about just that game's business perspective, putting other factors aside, and the marketability is kind of the first the first stage before you launch a game, and it starts with like the kind of the first time you visit this the first step. It's not the second and third time, but that's kind of what you're trying to gauge the in that first time you're approaching that step is
Mhm,
answering that question.
mhm. And does it differ? Does kind of testing for marketability differ for large versus small companies or different across different game genres?
If it's a niche product, then you'll need to invest a lot of time to get enough users to answer those questions, and also a lot of money. And if it's a and
Mm,
if it's a kind of a mainstream pop product, then it's going to be much easier, much faster because you'll get an answer quicker, basically, with less investment in user acquisition.
mhm, mhm. Right. And part of one of the important metrics to kind of be looking at this stage is IPM. So can you tell us what is IPM? What does it stand for? And what kind of factors can impact it?
Yep, definitely. IPM became a very important metric for specifically to step one and step four, which is kind of analyzing the whole closing that loop. It stands for installs per milli, basically per thousand impressions. So, in general, if 1,000 people out there, each one sees one ad for your game, how many of them will decide to download and open your game? And answering that question, optimizing that metric is critical because it really impacts your ability to scale this into a business. And the factors that can impact it are it's actually a long list, but and usually people invest most of their time into the creatives. So assuming if I'm going to show to those 1,000 people a better creative, there's going to be more people coming in, which is true. There's more. There's the audience itself. It's much harder to operate and address. But assuming the audience is completely broad, you're kind of targeting the general public out there. Um, what I call the not wasting impressions factor, which includes many kind of best practices. How do you not waste impressions and kind of not push your IPM down? And ASO, which is a very big factor in the funnel, because between that impression and until the user opens the app, there's usually that part that is overlooked by many teams. I've seen when you think about paid marketing.
Mm. So let's maybe dive into creatives. It's the sexiest part. Um, in what way do I mean? It's pretty obvious how creatives affect IPM. If you have a higher performing creative, your IPM will go up. Um, but can we sort of dive in a little bit to what are the best practices around creative today? How can you make sure that you're sort of optimizing how you're using creative inside your UA
Sure.
strategy?
So creative is definitely the biggest lever you can pull, and it's also the one of the most challenging levers in today's world because outside of creative, a lot has been solved through automation, but creative kind of requires you to also be creative. What is the right process and what tools do I need to use and things that I need to put in place to optimize creative? Um, Big part of that is creative production itself, whether you're using this or building this in house or using a third party or using one of your marketing channels assistants. And this is something that requires time, investment, budget to build those creatives. And it's not necessarily the more the merrier, but it's testing different strategies, different approaches. Which is the right messaging? Which character in my game people relate to the most? Should I test different scenarios? Should this be an in-game video? Should this be a playable ad? Should this be a portrait? Should it be landscape? Should it be 15 seconds? Should it be 30 seconds? I think answering all these questions it requires a plan and requires you to execute and build those creatives. That's a big part of that. In deciding obviously who should do that and getting the resources for that. And that requires time and money, and especially for the
Mm-hmm.
creative soft launch phase, which is very critical for the global launch. Is also answering those questions as part of the creative soft launch. So the soft launch is not only about making sure your game does not break and it has everything in place and it monetizes, engages well, but it's also answering those questions. So that's, I would say, the second element of the soft launch itself. Because other than that, later the creative is an ongoing process of how do you deal with the what is called creative fatigue and how do you replace. But it starts with kind of picking your best option. You want to answer those questions quickly. Allocate budget to answer that question. So what that basically means is that if you have, let's say, four creatives, which is not a lot, something, you want to test them in the right environment. You want to invest the right funds in this, where at the end of this process, you will have that answer. And then when you push the throttle on scaling things up through paid marketing, you have that winner and you can keep iterating on that one and others. But in that process, you've allocated budgets to answer that question. And you don't care, you should not care at that stage, was this all right, positive or not? You need to know which one is the best creative. It should be the best creative based on IPM, but also later on, you should also make sure that that creative is generating the best overall revenue, because the best IPN creative might not be the best creative for your business. A good example would be maybe a creative that is misleading too much and just getting too many users in, but they were expecting something else, and it drops all of your retention metrics and people do not monetize as well. So that balance of getting the most amount of people, which is IPM, that also monetize the best when you think about LTV, is the holy grail. And I think those are kind of the high level elements around creatives. Obviously, we can do five podcasts just about that, and there's a lot of stuff that can be found online. You can reach out to me if you have more questions, but that kind of is are the main elements as I see it.
So we've kind of jumped to talking in a way about creative soft launch, which we are going to dive into a little more deeply in a moment.
Hmm.
But before we do, maybe let's look at ASO, which you said has kind of been is often overlooked.
Yes.
How does it kind of fit into the beginning, the first stage of the growth loop, and specifically kind of IPM?
Yeah. So is this the beginning or the starting? Which one is it?
If only I
Yeah,
knew.
yeah, you should know. You should know. Tell me when you figure that out. So ASO, which stands for App Store Optimization, is is a very big element. Usually, people perceive ASO as something that is equivalent to SEO on web,
Hmm.
or is something that is focused on keywords and somewhat related to what is similar to SEM. So people coming in from search, whether it's paid or organic search behavior. But when you think about it, and it's kind of related to something I started with off with, where most games out there, most of their users are coming through paid acquisition. So they are seeing ads somewhere. They're seeing all your creatives. They're seeing that amazing best creative that you figured out through your amazing creative optimization process. They click through, but then they see the App Store page. So no matter how people get to your app, they will always go through that App Store page, which is very different than web. And on that page, there's a lot of elements that impact that conversion within that step. Because if people see something that they do not relate to, if they see something that they're disappointed of, or something that is basically changing that momentum that drove them to click through, it really harms your IPM, right? So because IPM is installs to 1,000 impressions, but that stage you have 1,000 impressions. Let's say 100 people click through, only 20 of them, if the IPM is 20, will download eventually the game. Why did 80 decide not to, even though they click through, right? So you have, yeah, so you have all that experience, which includes, the name, the title of the game, the icon, the description, the screenshots. Is there a video there? How long is that video? Which video is there? Is it the right icon, which is something that needs to be optimized? and it's not focused on search. It's not focused on bidding organics, because the reality is that no matter what you do, if you don't have a big IP or something that really can drive a lot of organic growth, not many people are going to land on your page, not through an ad. The ratings themselves, which are to be optimized uh, a lot once the product is out there, this can kill IPM, right? So if you have a 3.3 star rating versus 4.8, that's a big has a big impact on your IPM. With the same creative, with the same everything, that to itself is a big a step in the decision. And what we've seen is that usually ASO is either very behind, and even like basic best practices, or people just do not invest much in it, or it's just dealt by someone outside of the organization. Within a growth organization, that's something that should definitely sit there. But if it's product, if it's performance marketing, if it's ad monetization, who's dealing with that? It's usually someone that sits within product, and it's not connected to a very big part of the performance marketing, the step one, let's say. And that's a good example of something that is can really have a very bad or good impact on your IPM.
Hmm. So, as I said, we sort of started talking about creative soft launch, which is kind of including treating a soft launch not just about kind of optimizing your game, but also making sure that you've got the most powerful creatives ready to go when you go sort of full throttle on a global launch. Um, do you have sort of what are some of the best practices for a creative soft launch? We talked about answering specific questions, but are there, for example, specific ad units which you should make sure to use or test during a creative soft launch? Do interactive creatives have more of a place during a creative soft launch or not? Does it differ across genres? I've just asked you like 5 questions, so feel free to answer the one you're most comfortable with.
The answer is no. No, no, I'm kidding. So we for hyper casual genres, which rely a lot on very quick iterations, go no go stages, moving on to the next game. I think the creative soft launch is something that is not as realistic, because it just takes a lot of time, and it's kind of embedded into the game design itself and the creatives themselves that look the creatives basically mimic the game play itself, usually, if it's even if it's playable, that it's just showing the in-game video, sorry, a video, if it's just showing the in-game video, the the new versus expert, or a playable that is basically the game itself. So for these guys, I don't think the creative soft launch is something that should be perceived as a soft launch, because the soft launch it's just it's just embedded in the process. For the bigger
Hmm.
games, the games that have a much bigger investment in terms of time and resources, uh, that's something that needs to be planned ahead. It's on that timeline before the game is launched. There's a soft launch, and the big part of the soft launch is usually for these kind of games that the studios, the performance marketing and the product teams are split. So the product is focusing on optimizing the product, and the performance marketing's job should not be, hey, let's just get one, two, three, 4,000 users a day in, or a week in, so that we'll have enough metrics to optimize. But it's so people usually go to the cheaper markets to test that. But actually, rather being part of that process and owning the answering the question, when we do go live, should be the best creative, and that changes strategy, changes the market you go live. You want to be testing in very similar markets to where you are going to be mostly focused on later on in the global launch. And That's something that I think is the paradigm shift here. It's answering that. So being ready with those creatives, allocating budget, like I said earlier, and being ready with answering those questions, which means having the understanding of what is my PM, how much data should I have. Definitely engage with videos. That is the predominant kind of ad behavior out there across all channels, most channels, the bigger channels, um, and that's the paradigm shift. I think basically owning that soft launch phase when it comes to performance marketing, understanding how do we optimize that, and when do we are we ready to go live, or do we need some more time to invest in creatives, change the strategy? Or maybe the answer would be, hey, the monetization looks like it's trending to best case $4. The IPM, the best we've seen was 0.5. It looks like the players that are playing the game are monetizing okay, but the broad market does not want to play the game. So we have a problem here. Maybe we want to change something big in how that product is positioned, the name of the game, or maybe a different game, or maybe go with a different character to lead the game. Something we've seen that we're throughout the creative process, the soft launch usually, you can see maybe if you're testing different characters, different elements of the game, suddenly you see very strong engagement with a certain creative, and that certain creative has a character that is not leading the game, but people like it apparently. So maybe that character should lead the game.
Right.
That's just like one example, or something that should impact.
Like a feedback loop in creative
Yeah,
soft launch
exactly.
product.
So I hope that answered the question.
So
I hope so.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
all seven of them. Um, so you talked a little bit here about kind of teams, who sits on what team, who's responsible for what's the kind of conversation or sharing or versus silo between those teams. And actually, next episode when we tackle stage two, we'll be talking about monetization. Um, how does an increased connection between monetization and UA teams help businesses scale kind of both of these activities? Because I think that's a kind of a big part of the virtue of the growth loop.
Without the team sitting together, or being one team, or being under the same umbrella, it's just very hard to um, connect all the dots, measure the right things, get the right insights, agree on those insights, and execute on those insights, and accelerate that loop. So that's kind of, so if you are looking at that from the loop, from the loop perspective, it has to include that, because if it's not, if it's still disconnected, then like each one of those steps kind of hovers and not connected to the next one. So the loop is broken.
Mm-hmm. The loop isn't
Yeah,
a loop; it's just a
exactly.
bunch of.
And unfortunately, it is the case for some teams, and it's a challenge to overcome in terms of processes, setting the right goals to each team, managing the day to day. I don't know, politics, whatever it is. It's just make things harder. So
Mm-hmm.
in a this could have been only one guy doing everything, that would be the best. That whoever that Superman is. And if it's not the case, how do you build a team around that loop, where you have the right people in charge of making sure that everything is measured throughout the loop. So every step, every engagement with every impression, every click, every user, every event within your game, everything is funneled into your data warehouse. How is that collected? How is that visualized? How the insights are derived on that? Is there automation on top of that? Who is executing each part? Who is going to take action um, on optimizing the user acquisition the next morning? And who's going to take action on optimizing the product the next morning? And part of the loop is that every day has different insights that needs to be focused on. And sometimes it's the product, sometimes it's the marketing, sometimes something's broken with the creative, sometimes something's broken with the attribution flow. Sometimes something there's a shroud that kind of halts the loop from accelerating. And it's something that needs to be in the same room, where people look at the same metrics, see what's broken, and then double down on it. And then the more efficient it is, the faster the loop will accelerate. And in many cases, just won't accelerate if the things are broken, if you don't have the right setup in place. And that's part of the setup of the loop, is the team itself.
So, and this will be my last question about well, my last question and my last question about teams. You also talked about product, right? And kind of product and performance marketing, or product and UA working together. Is merging product with the merged UA and monetization? Let's call them the growth team, perhaps. Is that equally critical? or is it sort of a nice to have?
You mean them being together?
Yes, being a, I don't know if it has to be one team, but let's say sort of like a not a separate silo team.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely under the same umbrella. A good example would be live ops. So live ops is a big part of the growth loop, right? So a lot of insights that are coming from today, getting ready for tomorrow, are based on the current behavior of users within your game. So you want to take some action. You want to present a few sales. You want to engage with a specific segment better. You want to invest in segmentation. You want to test a few strategies. That sits within product
Mm,
mostly. That's great. A lot of it is maybe the answers to your questions are wrong because the users that came in
right.
yesterday, something was broken, or we were testing a different creative, and that was the reason why you had some noise with that, or that data was not cohorted, and you tested this for only for new users or not for people that played the game for more than 7 days. And think about the impact on the performance marketing team. So if they're trying to optimize to ROAS, they saw a big dip for users that were acquired January 7th through the 14th. They think that maybe something wrong with that creative, that when they compare it to creative that ran a month ago, it was better. Maybe we switch to that one. That would be a mistake because the dip was because something that was tested on the product side. That essentially they have to be sitting next to each other to make sure they have the right insights and see what the other does, so they can understand how will this impact uh,
Hmm.
their work.
Makes sense. If only everyone would just listen to Yevgeny.
No, obviously it's easier said than done.
For sure.
That's the challenge.
Well, that's all we have for today. Thank you very much, Yevgeny, for taking us on this journey through stage one. Tune in next episode for stage two of the growth loop, which, as I said, will be covering monetization.